Hungarian people. Published November the 15th, 2017. Special characters are denoted as follows. And denotes left and right parentheses. And denotes left angle and right angle brackets. Denotes a bullet point. Hungarians, also known as Magyars. In Hungarian, Magyarok, are a nation and ethnic group native to Hungary and historical Hungarian lands who share a common ancestry, culture, history and speak the Hungarian language. There are an estimated 13.1–14.7 million ethnic Hungarians and their descendants worldwide, of whom 8.5–9.8 million live in today's Hungary. As of 2011. About 2.2 million Hungarians live in areas that were part of the Kingdom of Hungary before the 1918–1920 dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy and the Treaty of Trianon, and are now parts of Hungary's 7 neighboring countries, especially Romania, Austria, Slovakia, Serbia and Ukraine. Significant groups of people with Hungarian ancestry live in various other parts of the world, most of them in the United States, Canada, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Australia, and Argentina. Hungarians can be classified into several subgroups according to local linguistic and cultural characteristics. Subgroups with distinct identities include the Szekulis, the Ksangos, the Palak, and the Jász people. Part 1. Name. The Hungarians' own ethnonym to denote themselves in the early Middle Ages is uncertain. The exonym Hungarian is thought to be derived from Ugor. Prior to the Hungarian conquest of the Carpathian Basin in 895–6 and while they lived on the steppes of Eastern Europe east of the Carpathian Mountains, written sources called the Magyars, Hungarians, specifically, Hungary, by Georgius Monachus in 837, Hungary, by Annals Bertiniani in 862, and Ungari, by the Annals ex Annalibus Uvivensibus in 881. The Magyars/Hungarians probably belong to the Onoga tribal alliance, and it is possible that they became its ethnic majority. In the early Middle Ages the Hungarians had many names, including Wfgrzy, Polish, Unghars, Italian, Ungar, German, and Hungarus. The H prefix is a later addition of medieval Latin. Another possible explanation comes from the Old Russian, Yugara. It may refer to the Hungarians during a time when they dwelt east of the Ural Mountains along the natural borders of Europe and Asia before their conquest of the Carpathian Basin. The Hungarian people refer to themselves by the demonym Magyar rather than Hungarian. Magyar is Finno-Ugric from the Old Hungarian Maga. Magyar possibly derived from the name of the most prominent Hungarian tribe, the Mega. The tribal name Mega became Magyar in reference to the Hungarian people as a whole. Magyar may also derive from the Hunnic Mugeris or Mughal. The Greek cognate of Torquia was used by the scholar and Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus in his De Administrando Imperio of c. AD 950, though in his use, Turks always referred to Magyars. The historical Latin phrase Natio Hungarica, Hungarian nation, had a wider and political meaning because it once referred to all nobles of the Kingdom of Hungary, regardless of their ethnicity or mother tongue. Part 2. History. Part 2. History. Chapter 1. Pre-40th century AD. During the 4th millennium BC, the Uralic-speaking peoples who were living in the central and southern regions of the Urals split up. Some dispersed towards the west and northwest and came into contact with Iranian speakers who were spreading northwards. From at least 2000 BC onwards, the Hungarian speakers became distinguished from the rest of the Uralic community. Judging by evidence from burial mounds and settlement sites, they interacted with the Indo-Iranian and Renovo culture. Part 2. History. Chapter 2. 4th century to c. 830. In the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the Hungarians moved from the west of the Ural Mountains to the area between the southern Ural Mountains and the Volga River known as Bashkiria, Bashkortostan, and Permkrai. In the early 8th century, some of the Hungarians moved to the Don River to an area between the Volga, Don and the Seversky Donets rivers. Meanwhile, the descendants of those Hungarians who stayed in Bashkiria remained there as late as 1241. The Hungarians around the Don River were subordinates of the Kazakh Khaganate. Their neighbors were the archaeological Soldov culture, that is, Bulgars, Proto-Bulgarians, Onogars, and the Alans, from whom they learned gardening, elements of cattle breeding and of agriculture. Tradition holds that the Hungarians were organized in a confederacy of 7 tribes. The names of the 7 tribes were Jano, Kur, Keszi, Kurt, Gyamat, Mega, Nyack, and Tarjan. Part 2. History. Chapter 3. c. 830 to c. 895. Around 830, a rebellion broke out in the Kazakh Khaganate. As a result, 3 Kabar tribes of the Kazakh joined the Hungarians and moved to what the Hungarians call the Etelkoz, the territory between the Carpathians and the Dnieper River. The Hungarians faced their first attack by the Pechenegs around 854, though other sources state that an attack by Pechenegs was the reason for their departure to Etelkoz. The new neighbors of the Hungarians were the Varangians and the Eastern Slavs. From 862 onwards, the Hungarians, already referred to as the Hungary, along with their allies, the Kabars, started a series of looting raids from the Etelkoz into the Carpathian Basin, mostly against the Eastern Frankish Empire, Germany, and Great Moravia, but also against the Balaton Principality and Bulgaria. Part 2. History. Chapter 4. Entering the Carpathian Basin. c. 895. In 895–896, under the leadership of Upad, some Hungarians crossed the Carpathians and entered the Carpathian Basin. The tribe called Magyar was the leading tribe of the Hungarian alliance that conquered the center of the basin. At the same time, c. 895. Due to their involvement in the 894–896 Bulgaro-Byzantine War, Hungarians in Etelkoz were attacked by Bulgaria and then by their old enemies the Pechenegs. The Bulgarians won the decisive Battle of Southern Ba. It is uncertain whether or not those conflicts were the cause of the Hungarian departure from Etelkoz. From the Upper Tisza region of the Carpathian Basin, the Hungarians intensified their looting raids across continental Europe. In 900, they moved from the Upper Tisza River to Transdanubia, Pannonia. Citation needed, which later became the core of the arising Hungarian state. At the time of the Hungarian migration, the land was inhabited only by a sparse population of Slavs, numbering about 200,000, who were either assimilated or enslaved by the Hungarians. Archaeological findings, for example, in the Polish city of Przemysl, suggest that many Hungarians remained to the north of the Carpathians after 895–896. There is also a consistent Hungarian population in Transylvania, the Szekulis, who comprise 40% of the Hungarians in Romania. The Shikli people's origin, and in particular the time of their settlement in Transylvania, is a matter of historical controversy. Part 2. History. Chapter 5. After 900. In 907, The Hungarians destroyed a Bavarian army in the Battle of Pressburg and laid the territories of present-day Germany, France, and Italy open to Hungarian raids, which were fast and devastating. The Hungarians defeated the imperial army of Louis the Child, son of Arnulf of Carinthia and last legitimate descendant of the German branch of the House of Charlemagne, near Augsburg in 910. From 917 to 925, Hungarians raided through Basil, Alsace, Burgundy, Saxony, and Provence. Hungarian expansion was checked at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, ending their raids against Western Europe, but raids on the Balkan Peninsula continued until 970. The Pope approved Hungarian settlement in the area when their leaders converted to Christianity, and St. King Stephen I Zentistvan was crowned King of Hungary in 1001. The century between the arrival of the Hungarians from the Eastern European plains and the consolidation of the Kingdom of Hungary in 1001 was dominated by pillaging campaigns across Europe, from Dania, Denmark, to the Iberian Peninsula, contemporary Spain and Portugal. After the acceptance of the nation into Christian Europe under Stephen I, Hungary served as a bulwark against further invasions from the east and south, especially by the Turks. At this time, the Hungarian nation numbered around 400,000 people. The first accurate measurements of the population of the Kingdom of Hungary, including ethnic composition, were carried out in 1850–51. There is a debate among Hungarian and non-Hungarian, especially Slovak and Romanian historians, about the possible changes in the ethnic structure of the region throughout history. Some historians support the theory that the proportion of Hungarians in the Carpathian Basin was at an almost constant 80% during the Middle Ages. Non-Hungarians numbered hardly more than 20% to 25% of the total population. The Hungarian population began to decrease only at the time of the Ottoman conquest, reaching as low as around 39% by the end of the 18th century. The decline of the Hungarians was due to the constant wars, Ottoman raids, famines, and plagues during the 150 years of Ottoman rule. The main zones of war were the territories inhabited by the Hungarians, so the death toll depleted them at a much higher rate than among other nationalities. In the 18th century, their proportion declined further because of the influx of new settlers from Europe, especially Slovaks, Serbs and Germans. As a consequence of Turkish occupation and Habsburg colonization policies, the country underwent a great change in ethnic composition as its population more than tripled to 8 million between 1720 and 1787, while only 39% of its people were Hungarians, who lived primarily in the center of the country. Other historians, particularly Slovaks and Romanians, argue that the drastic change in the ethnic structure hypothesized by Hungarian historians in fact did not occur. They argue that the Hungarians accounted for only about 30 to 40%. Citation needed of the kingdom's population from its establishment. In particular, there is a fierce debate among Hungarians and Romanian historians about the ethnic composition of Transylvania through these times. In the 19th century, the proportion of Hungarians in the Kingdom of Hungary rose gradually, reaching over 50% by 1900 due to higher natural growth and Magyarization. Between 1787 and 1910 the number of ethnic Hungarians rose from 2.3 million to 10.2 million, accompanied by the resettlement of the Great Hungarian Plain and Vojvodina by mainly Roman Catholic Hungarian settlers from the northern and western counties of the Kingdom of Hungary. In 1715, after the Ottoman occupation, the southern Great Plain was nearly uninhabited but now has 1.3 million inhabitants, nearly all of them Hungarians. Spontaneous assimilation was an important factor, especially among the German and Jewish minorities and the citizens of the bigger towns. On the other hand, about 1.5 million people, about two-thirds non-Hungarian, left the Kingdom of Hungary between 1890 to 1910 to escape from poverty. The years 1918 to 1920 were a turning point in the Hungarians' history. By the Treaty of Trianon, the kingdom had been cut into several parts, leaving only a quarter of its original size. 1/3 of the Hungarians became minorities in the neighboring countries. During the remainder of the 20th century, the Hungarians' population of Hungary grew from 7.1 million 1920 to around 10.4 million 1980. Despite losses during the Second World War and the wave of emigration after the attempted revolution in 1956, the number of Hungarians in the neighboring countries tended to remain the same or slightly decreased, mostly due to assimilation. Sometimes forced, see Slovakization and Romanianization, and to emigration to Hungary. In the 1990s, especially from Transylvania and Vojvodina. After the baby boom of the 1950s, Ratko era, a serious demographic crisis began to develop in Hungary and its neighbors. The Hungarian population reached its maximum in 1980, then began to decline. For historical reasons. See Treaty of Trianon. Significant Hungarian minority populations can be found in the surrounding countries, most of them in Romania, in Transylvania, Slovakia, and Serbia, in Vojvodina. Sizable minorities live also in Ukraine, in Transcarpathia, Croatia, primarily Slavonia, and Austria, in Burgenland. Slovenia is also host to a number of ethnic Hungarians, and Hungarian language has an official status in parts of the Prekmij region. Today more than 2 million ethnic Hungarians live in nearby countries. There was a referendum in Hungary in December 2004 on whether to grant Hungarian citizenship to Hungarians living outside Hungary's borders. That is, without requiring a permanent residence in Hungary. The referendum failed due to insufficient vote turnout. On the 26th of May 2010, Hungary's parliament passed a bill granting dual citizenship to ethnic Hungarians living outside of Hungary. Some neighboring countries with sizable Hungarian minorities expressed concerns over the legislation. Part 3. Ethnic Affiliations and Genetic Origins. Thanks to Paul Liptak's researches, it has been known for almost half a century that only 16.7% of 10th century human bones belong to the Euro-Mongoloid and Mongoloid types. The European characteristics in the biological composition of the recent Hungarian population and the lack of Asian markers are not solely due to the 1,000 years of blending. Biologically, the population around 1000 AD in Hungary was made up almost exclusively of Europeans. According to a 2008 publication from the European Journal of Human Genetics, the Y-DNA haplogroup R101A M17 was found amongst 57% of Hungarian male samples, genetically clustering them with that of their neighboring West Slavic neighbors, the Czechs, Poles, and Slovaks. Another study on Y chromosome markers concluded that modern Hungarian and Shikli-S, a subgroup of Hungarians living in the Shikliel and in modern-day central Romania, are genetically related, and that they share similar components described for other Europeans, except for the presence of the haplogroup P M173 in Shikli samples, which may reflect a Central Asian connection from at the time of the Hungarian migration from the Urals to Europe. Neporocki argues, based on new archaeogenetic results, that the conqueror Hungarians were mostly a mixture of Hunnic, Slavic, and German tribes, and this composite people evolved in the steppes of Eastern Europe between 400 and 1000 AD. This research group also established that genetic continuity can be detected between ancient and modern Hungarians. Another study on Y chromosome markers concluded that modern Hungarian and Szekler populations are genetically closely related, and that they share similar components described for other Europeans, except for the presence of the haplogroup P. XM 173. In Szekler samples, which may reflect a Central Asian connection, and high frequency of haplogroup J in both Szeklers and Hungarians. According to Dreis-Ziger, there were not genetic, anthropological and linguistic connections between the conquerors of 895 and modern Hungarian population and Hungarian language. According to a 2008 study, the mitochondrial lines of the Hungarians are indistinct from that of neighboring West Slavs. They are distinct from that of the ancient Hungarians. Magyars. 4th century skeletons from well-documented cemeteries in Hungary of ancient Magyar individuals were sampled. 2 of the 4 males belonged to Y-DNA haplogroup N, confirming their Uralic origin. None out of 100 sampled modern Hungarians carried the haplogroup, and just 1 of about 94 Szeklerese carried it. The study also stated that it was possible that the more numerous pre-existing populations or substantial later migrations, mostly Avars and Slavs, accepted the Uralic language of the elite. An autosomal analysis, studying non-European admixture in Europeans, found 4.4% of admixture of non-European and non-Middle Eastern origin among Hungarians, which was the strongest among sampled populations. It was found at 3.6% in Belarusians, 2.5% in Romanians, 2.3% in Bulgarians and Lithuanians, 1.9% in Poles and 0% in Greeks. The authors stated this signal might correspond to a small genetic legacy from invasions of peoples from the Asian steppes. For example, the Huns, Magyars, and Bulgars. During the first millennium CE, compared to the European nations, Andrea Vargo-Zielin's study determined that the Bulgarians were genetically the closest and the Estonians and Finns were among the furthest from the recent Hungarian population. According to Bamjavhoralma's study, which is based on 230 samples and expected to include 6 to 8% Gypsy peoples, the small Hungarian haplogroup distribution study from Hungary is as follows. 26% R1A, 20% I2A, 19% R1B, 7% I, 6% J2, 5% H, 5% G2A, 5% E1B1B101, 3% J1, 1% N, less than 1% R2. According to another study by Bamjav, the area of Bedrogkoz suggested to be a population isolate found an elevated frequency of haplogroup N, R1A M458, 20.4%, I201 P37, 19%, R1A Z280, 14.3%, and E1B M78, 10.2%. Various R1B M343 subgroups accounted for 15% of the Bedrogkoz population. Haplogroup N1C TAT covered 6.2% of the lineages, but most of it belonged to the N1C VL29 subgroup, which is more frequent among Balto-Slavic-speaking and Finno-Ugric-speaking peoples. Other haplogroups had frequencies of less than 5%. Among 100 Hungarian men, 90 of whom from the Great Hungarian Plain, the following haplogroups and frequencies are obtained: 30% R1A, 15% R1B, 13% I201, 13% J2, 9% E1B1B1A, 8% I1, 3% G2, 3% J1, 3% I, 1% E, 1% F, 1% K. The 97 Szeklerese belong to the following haplogroups: 20% R1B, 19% R1A, 17% I1, 11% J2, 10% J1, 8% E1 B1 B1A, 5% I2O1, 5% G2, 3% P. 1% E. 1% N. It can be inferred that Szekelyes have more significant German admixture. A study sampling 45 Palak from Budapest and northern Hungary found 60% R1A, 13% R1B, 11% I, 9% E, 2% G, 2% J2. A study estimating possible inter-Asian admixture among nearly 500 Hungarians based on paternal lineages only estimated it at 5.1% in Hungary, at 7.4% in Szekelyes and at 6.3% at Xangos. It has boldly been noted that this is an upper limit by deep SNPS and that the main haplogroups responsible for that contribution are J2 M172, negative M47, M67, L24, M12, J2 L24, R1A Z93, QM242 and EM78, the latter of which is typically European, while N is still negligible. 1.7%. In an attempt to divide N into subgroups L1034 and L708, some Hungarian, Szekler, and Uzbek samples were found to be L1034 SNP positive, while all Mongolians, Buryats, Khanty, Finnish, and Roma samples showed a negative result for this marker. The 2,500 years old SNPL 1034 was found typical for Mansi and Hungarians, the closest linguistic relatives. Anthropologically, the type of Magyars of the conquest phase shows similarity to that of the Andronovo people, in particular of the Sarmatian groups around the southern Urals, the Turanid, South Siberian, and the Uralid types from the Europo-Mongoloids were dominant among the conquering Hungarians. Excavations of several Sarmatians showed that they belonged to haplogroup G2A, J1, J2 and R1A Z93. Lesser and mark name equals paragraph / more than the following information is inferred from 433 Hungarian samples from the Hungarian Magyar Y-DNA project in Family Tree. The 29th of May 2017. 26.1% R1A, 15% Z280, 6.5% M458, 0.9% Z93 equals more than S23201, Altai/Jianshen, 3.7% unknown. 19.2% R1B, 6% L11 P312/U106, 5.3% P312, 4.2% L23/Z2103, 3.7% U106, 16.9% I2, 15.2% CTS 10228, 1.4% M223, 0.5% L38, 8.3% I1, 8.1% J2, 5.3% M410, 2.8% M102, 6.9% E1 B1 B1, 6% V13, 0.3% V22, 0.3% M123, 0.3% M81, 6.9% G2A, 3.2% N, 1.4% Z9136 Ugric/Proto-Magyar, 0.5% M2019/VL67 Siberia and Baikal, 0.5% Y 7310 Central Europe, 0.9% Z 16981 Baltic. Note: only unrelated males are sampled. 2.3% Q. 1.2% EAP 789 Hun/Turkmens, 0.9% M346 Siberia, 0.2% M242 Xiaonu, 0.9% T, 0.5% J1, 0.2% L, 0.2% C. Part 3. Ethnic Affiliations and Genetic Origins. Chapter 1. Other Influences. Besides the various peoples mentioned above, the Magyars assimilated or were influenced by subsequent peoples arriving in the Carpathian Basin. Among these are the Cumans, Pechenegs, Jazones, West Slavs, Germans, Vlachs, Romanians, amongst others. Ottomans, who occupied the central part of Hungary from c. 1526 until c. 1699, inevitably exerted an influence, as did the various nations. Germans, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, and others that resettled depopulated territories after their departure, similar to other European countries, Jewish, Armenians, and Roma. Gypsy minorities have been living in Hungary since the Middle Ages. Part 4. Hungarian diaspora. Hungarian diaspora, Magyar diaspora, is a term that encompasses the total ethnic Hungarian population located outside of current-day Hungary. Part 5. Maps. Part 6. Folklore and Communities. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, please visit www.frogcast.org.